Imagine spending $500 million on a structure floating in open ocean, held in place by satellite-guided thrusters, drilling through 2 miles of water and another 5 miles of rock, all before you know for certain there's anything down there worth finding. Now imagine paying $1 million a day just to keep that operation running while you wait to find out. This isn't a gamble people take lightly. This is a normal offshore drilling campaign, and most of the money is spent long before a single drop of oil ever reaches the surface. Most people see an oil rig on the horizon and assume it's already a money machine, pumping crude, printing profit. The reality is almost the opposite. By the time a rig is visibly producing oil, the company behind it has often already spent years and hundreds of millions of dollars just to get to that point, with absolutely no guarantee any of it would pay off. Offshore oil isn't a business of extraction. It's a business of extremely expensive, extremely uncertain bets, made years in advance, in one of the harshest environments on the planet. Let's start at the very beginning, because the spending starts long before anyone builds anything. Before a single well gets drilled, companies spend years and tens of millions of dollars on seismic surveys, sending sound waves down through miles of ocean and rock, then analyzing the echoes to build a three-dimensional picture of what might be underground. This is not a guess. It's genuinely sophisticated geophysics. But here's the uncomfortable truth the industry doesn't advertise. Even with the best modern seismic imaging, exploration wells, the first wells drilled in a new area, still fail to find commercially viable oil more often than they succeed. Some estimates put exploration success rates at well under 50% in frontier regions. That means a company can spend tens of millions of dollars on surveys, tens of millions more on an exploratory well, and walk away with nothing, not a disappointing result. Nothing, a dry hole, as the industry calls it, and the entire investment is gone. Now let's talk about what it actually costs to drill a single exploratory well in deep water, because this is where the real numbers become almost hard to believe. A deep water exploration well, drilled in water over a mile deep and then continuing thousands of feet further into the seabed, can cost anywhere from $50 to over $100 million for a single well, and that's if nothing goes wrong. Drilling in water this deep requires specialized drillships, vessels that use dynamic positioning, meaning banks of computer-controlled thrusters constantly adjusting to hold the ship in an exact position over the wellhead, sometimes for months at a time, without ever dropping anchor, because anchoring isn't possible at these depths. Renting one of these drill ships, along with its specialized crew, can cost several $100,000 a day, and that clock runs whether the drilling is going smoothly or whether the crew is sitting idle, waiting for a weather window or a mechanical repair. Here's a detail that surprises people. That daily rate isn't optional, and it doesn't pause for bad luck. If a drill bit gets stuck thousands of feet underground, which happens, the crew has to work to free it, sometimes for days, all while the day rate for the ship, the crew, and every piece of support equipment keeps accumulating. If a section of pipe has to be pulled up and replaced because of unexpected geological conditions, that's not a quick fix. It can take the better part of a week, and every single hour of that week is being paid for at the same rate as if drilling were actively happening. Let's talk about the support fleet, because a single drilling operation is never actually a single vessel. Offshore drilling requires a constant supply chain of specialized support ships, vessels that ferry equipment, drilling mud, fuel, and personnel out to the rig, because a rig hundreds of miles from shore can't simply run out of a critical part and wait for the next scheduled delivery. These supply vessels run continuous rotations, and each one has its own crew, its own fuel costs, and its own charter rate, typically tens of thousands of dollars per day per vessel. Add helicopter transport, because getting personnel to and from a platform hundreds of miles offshore isn't done by boat when speed matters, and you're looking at another significant recurring cost. With strict weight and weather limitations that mean a single medical evacuation can require diverting an entire flight schedule. Now let's talk about the people, because working offshore is one of the most specialized labor markets in the world. A typical drilling operation runs continuous shifts, meaning the rig never stops working, drilling around the clock in what the industry calls tours, typically 12-hour shifts that rotate through 2 or 3-week offshore rotations, followed by equivalent time back on shore. Every person on that rig, Drillers, mud engineers, geologists, safety officers, medics, cooks, has to be transported out, housed, fed, and paid, whether the well is producing valuable data or sitting stalled due to a mechanical issue. A rig can carry anywhere from 100 to over 200 people at any given time, and unlike an onshore job site, you cannot simply send people home at the end of a difficult day. They live there, in purpose-built accommodation modules, for weeks at a time. Safety costs in this industry are not optional line items, they're existential ones. Every offshore rig has to maintain blowout preventers, massive stacks of valves designed to seal a well in an emergency and prevent an uncontrolled release of oil and gas, and those systems require constant testing, inspection, and certification. The industry learned an incredibly expensive lesson about what happens when this equipment fails. A well control incident in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010 resulted in a blowout that killed 11 crew members and released millions of barrels of oil into the ocean over 87 days before the well was finally sealed. The company involved ultimately faced costs, including cleanup, fines, and settlements, that ran into the tens of billions of dollars. That single incident reshaped offshore safety regulation worldwide, adding new layers of required equipment, redundant safety systems, and inspection regimes that every operator now has to fund as a standing cost of doing business, regardless of how safely their own operation is run. If you're finding these hidden operational realities as fascinating as we do, hit subscribe, because every week we break down what it actually costs to keep the world's most complex and dangerous systems running, the numbers nobody puts in the headlines. Let's talk about weather, because in offshore drilling, weather isn't an inconvenience, it's one of the single largest sources of unplanned cost. A drilling operation in a hurricane-prone region has to be prepared to fully evacuate personnel and, in some cases, temporarily disconnect from the wellhead and move the entire drillship out of the storm's path, then return and reconnect once conditions clear. That evacuation and reconnection process can cost millions of dollars and cost days or weeks of lost drilling time, all while the day rate for the vessel and crew continues, because the ship still has to be crewed, fueled, and maintained, even while sailing away from a storm instead of drilling. Now, let's say the exploration well actually succeeds, and the company finds a commercially viable oil reservoir. You'd think the expensive part is over. It isn't. It's just beginning. Now comes the appraisal phase, drilling additional wells to understand the actual size and shape of the reservoir, because a single successful well tells you oil exists, not how much. And companies that rush into full development based on a single data point have made catastrophically expensive mistakes in the past. Appraisal drilling can add tens of millions more dollars before a single barrel is ever produced commercially. Then comes actual field development, and this is where the numbers reach a completely different scale. Building a permanent production platform, the massive fixed or floating structures capable of processing oil for years or decades, can cost anywhere from several hundred million to well over $1 billion, depending on water depth and field size. You need subsea infrastructure, pipelines running along the ocean floor connecting wellheads to the platform, and export pipelines or shuttle tanker systems to actually move the oil to market once it's extracted. All of this has to be engineered to withstand decades of saltwater corrosion, storm loading, and constant mechanical stress, in an environment where a repair crew can't simply drive out with a truck full of parts. Here's the number that puts the whole picture together. Industry estimates suggest that developing a major deepwater oil field, from the very first seismic survey through to the platform actually producing oil, can take anywhere from 5 to 10 years and cost several billion dollars in total, and that's before counting a single dollar of ongoing daily operating expense once production actually begins. The exploration phase alone, the years of surveys, exploratory wells, and appraisal drilling that happen before any oil generates revenue, can easily account for hundreds of millions of dollars of that total, all of it spent purely to determine whether the project should proceed at all. So why does anyone take this bet? Because when it works at a scale almost no other industry can match. A major offshore field can produce hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil a day for decades, generating revenue that, over the lifespan of the field, can dwarf even the enormous upfront investment many times over. But that outcome is never guaranteed at the start. Every single offshore project begins as an expensive bet on geology that nobody can see directly, backed by imaging technology that's remarkably good but still fundamentally a prediction, not a certainty. Companies budget for this. They run portfolios of exploration projects specifically because they know a significant percentage will fail, and they need the successes to be large enough to cover the ones that come up dry. So the next time you see an oil rig sitting on the horizon, remember what you're actually looking at. You're looking at the visible result of years of seismic surveys, tens of millions of dollars in exploration wells that might have found nothing, a support fleet of ships and helicopters running around the clock, safety systems that exist because of catastrophic lessons the industry learned the hard way, and a company that, in many cases, spent hundreds of millions of dollars before it had any certainty the whole thing would ever pay off. The oil is the payoff. Getting there is the entire business. Disclaimer: this content is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Operational costs are estimates based on available data.